Right. Good evening. My name is Dr. Naa-Solo Tettey. I am the creator and director of the HeartSmarts program. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, returning participants. Welcome, new people who are joining us for the first time. Glad to have you here. Tonight is a continuation of the HeartSmarts community education series. And prior to tonight's event, we were focusing on raw living foods. Now we're going to kind of shift back to just general overall health topics. So you all can ask tonight really any questions that you have. They don't have to focus on raw or living foods, but you can ask those questions as well. Tonight is more of a year in review. So all of the things that we focused on this year, anything new that has come up for you, anything that you like to ask Coach Jay, you can put your questions in the chat, more so after he finishes speaking so that we can have those questions at the end and it'll be easier for me to see them. Just some quick announcements. This Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, there will be a HeartSmarts information session for those people who would like to bring HeartSmarts to their churches, to their communities, community organizations, or as an individual if you would like to join. This is not necessarily for people who are in the HeartSmarts program currently. This is for new people to start in January or in the spring of next year. So this Thursday, I'll send that flyer out after this meeting, this Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Next Monday, we will have our final community education session for the year, and we'll have Doug Evans, who's the author of the Sprout book. We're asking you all to really share that flyer with anyone you can who you think could benefit from sprouting and learning about sprouting. In January for HeartSmarts, we'll be doing a 30 days sprouting program with Doug Evans, and he'll also be announcing some other programs that he has. And so I think it'll be a very beneficial program next Monday at 7 p.m., next Monday, December 11th. And so I will send out the flyer for that as well after this meeting. I just didn't want anyone to get confused by sending out too many flyers at once. And then Coach Jay, I have to make this announcement because you're here. So for everyone who's listening, who's on this meeting, Thanksgiving is over, right? So about 2 weeks now, Thanksgiving has been over and we are getting back on track, right? So if this meeting is what you need to get back on track, remember I always tell you all, it's very, very easy to go back to old behaviors. It starts off slowly and then before you know it, you are where you thought you would never go back to again. We're not doing that, right? So take this moment, if I'm talking to you, this is the reset. We are getting back on track. It's done. Whatever you did is forgotten, and we are moving forward from this point on. And so, Coach Jay, I think that's a great point for you to take it over. And I want you all to share one more thing. The video that the HeartSmarts participants had to watch today was about food addiction. And Coach Jay, I want to ask you about your thoughts on that later in the meeting. But I want you all to share, if you're comfortable, what are some areas that you're struggling with? We did, for many of us, the raw living foods program, and we were able to get off the sugar and the processed foods and all of that. But then Thanksgiving happened, and some of you may have backslid a bit. I can see some faces lighting up with that. So you can share in the chat, what is your issue? What is the thing that keeps pulling you back so that we can ask Coach Jay about that, specifically those foods, and how we really make that break for good if that's what we're trying to do. All right, everyone. So again, I introduced to you Coach Jamard Banks of Herbal Kemistry, and he is our HeartSmarts favorite. And so that's why I brought him back to kind of wrap us up for the year. And so I'm going to get off screen and we will have Coach Jay take over. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Peace and good health. Look, don't feel bad. The macaroni and cheese was calling me the entire time. So you are not alone. I was like this, scratching myself like my name was Pookie, looking at the mac and cheese. I did wait until I got my hands on the vegan mac and cheese. It didn't hit the same, but it did the job. And again, when it comes to, consuming those high amounts of carbs, that's no different from eating a bowl of sugar. So I know my vitamin B1 just took a complete plummet down the toilet, but, it does happen. We want to actually be able to have our bodies have that room to flex. So now I'm going to, do a little presentation for you guys. I'm going to give you something to remind you of, what it is that we're up against, why we detox, what is this process that we're going through, what's out there. So I'm going to touch on a couple of different topics. All right. So let me push some buttons here. All right. Perfect. All right. So moving forward, lifestyle changes for better living. Let's see, we were talking about how, the experience of going through detoxification processes and how, we feel really, really good. And then all of a sudden, sometimes we may start to have like diminishing returns. We may feel ourselves wanting to slip back. Okay. What's that? We're going to dive into a little bit. What's that? What is going on with that? Give you a little bit of background information on myself. So my name is Coach Jay. I'm a clinical herbalist. I have a background. I have 14 years of emergency medical technician. I started doing that. That was my introduction to Western medicine. And from there, I went into working as a CPHD as in pharmacy. I worked in a chemotherapy hospital. I did mainly hyperalimentations and raw chemical compounding for them. It was like my real introduction into medicine making. Towards the end of that, I got into the materials management aspect of it. And I think I lost the enchantment of Western medicine at that time, once we started to get into how the money was being handled. And I dropped my lab coat. I picked up a gun and a badge and became a state corrections officer for about 16 years out of Rahway State Prison and ADTC, Adult Diagnostic Treatment Center. So from there, I started having my own health issues. I started to get sick. I was losing weight. I'm sorry, I was actually gaining weight. I was hypertensive, high cholesterol, diabetic. Everything that could go wrong was going wrong. I had a short temper. I thought that was part of being a cop, though. I didn't put the two and two together. So I ended up going to my doctor. He wanted to put me on medication. And I refused to take the drugs. I didn't want to take them, mainly because after working in pharmacy, I knew that the medications he was prescribing was not going to help my testosterone, and my testosterone was already extremely low. So I ended up running into an African herbalist out in Uniondale, New York, and he's the one that mainly got me started and put me on a high spice raw foods diet. Immediately, I started noticing some significant changes, and I started cyclical fasting. So I would basically detoxify myself seasonally. And within the first 2 years, I dropped a total of 72 pounds. I went from running 3 miles to 15 miles. My testosterone went through the roof. I got 5 kids. Don't ask me no questions. My energy is absolutely insane. Cognitive function increased. And it led me to actually not wanting to work in state law enforcement anymore. So now I function as a full-time clinical herbalist. I have an office out in Somerset. And I'm also a holistic health coach. So as a clinical herbalist, we study phytochemistry, biochemistry, and environmental toxicity. I spend a lot of time out in the forest analyzing and looking at plants and trying to figure out which compounds I can isolate to combine with other compounds found in other plants and how to make very nice scientific medicine from them. And last, but definitely not least, I am a father of 5 beautiful children. So going into detoxing in 2023. All right. So we're starting to notice that plant, immediately once we start doing the changes, especially if you found yourself, having a flexible diet, introduction to a plant-based eating, it improves your overall health, like almost immediately. You're going to notice huge leaps and bounds in your health. Okay. But we are starting to notice that in the United States, after about 2 to 3 years, vegan and plant-based seems to have some type of diminishing returns, meaning we're still having this need for either supplementation, or you're starting to notice that your energy isn't as clean or as clear as it was before. You're starting to notice that maybe even your muscle mass may begin to diminish. There's issues with protein absorption. There are a lot of other things that are going on. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that the style of eating or as in vegan or plant-based is a problem. There's actually something else a little bit deeper that we're going to touch on as far as what's happening with the plants. All right. So we also notice that we're almost always in need of a supplement of some kind. Either you're taking a B complex, you're taking B12, maybe you are taking a vitamin D supplement, but we're always finding that we're in some need of a supplement. So we're not able to get all of the nutrition from the plants. We're still missing something, okay? And still in the United States to this day, dairy and animal proteins, they're scary by comparison when it comes to plant-based proteins or a primarily plant or vegan diet, because of what we know about what's happening with the animals. And it gets a little deeper when we start analyzing the emotional structure of the animals that we're consuming. If you want, we'll dig in a little bit on that as well. So I use an example, the Hunza people out in Africa, they consume 90% fruits and vegetables, natural grains, and only 10% of their diet will include meat and or dairy. And the bulk of their food is fruits and vegetables and ain't natural, or what we will call ancient grains. These are the non-genetically modified forms of the grain that, you know, has continued to grow exactly the same for thousands and thousands of years, not the ones that we've modified by scrambling its DNA somehow. Okay, so this group of people actually has some of the longest lifespans. So it's easy to draw a conclusion that sometimes having that a little bit of flexibility does give to a benefit for some groups of people. Okay, I do use in my office a lot of Dr. Diadamo's work on blood type diet. And what you'll find is that certain blood types will be keen to certain genetic blueprint, whereas certain groups of people or certain blood types may at certain times be able to enjoy certain forms of protein, such as animal protein. So for example, during Thanksgiving, that was a perfect example. Thanksgiving was just around a full moon, and during full moons, the amygdala swells, your IgA levels go up, your body's natural ability to break down animal proteins is actually at its highest. So it's timed appropriately. Doesn't mean we're supposed to have it all the time, though. So we're only supposed to have it for short periods of time, maybe between 30 and 45-day intervals, and very, very small pieces. Whatever can fit in your hand is all you should have. And we're all used to those big, large sandwich-sized servings of animal protein, and that is something you definitely do not want to do, definitely not in the United States. So the question is, you know, what's going on? What is the problem with, you know, our food? It's not just, you know, the animal protein. It's definitely not just the dairy. We're starting to have some issues with our plants as well, as we'll get into. So it's almost as if, you know, it doesn't matter, you know, what you're eating. You know, you could be eating plant-based, you could be eating animal protein, you could be consuming dairy, and all of them are going to still give you some problems depending upon where you are with your health. So that causes a lot of concern where people are trying to figure out what works best for them. And of course, plants are always going to be one of the best options because they tend to be the easiest to digest. But having the easiest foods to digest doesn't necessarily mean that the gut flora and fauna, as well as your hydrochloric acid levels, are optimal to extract the nutrition from those plant-based proteins. So if you have issues with animal protein and you notice stomach discomfort, and then we switch to plant-based proteins, especially a plant-based protein like beans, you may find that the discomfort level is just simply different, because beans are considered to be what we would call caustic, and something that's caustic is the opposite of something that's acidic, meaning it's going to neutralize the stomach acids and may slow down the protein absorption necessary for the body to extract the amino acid proteins that it needs. So getting to that root cause of what was causing the discomfort in the first place, as well as knowing whether or not, you know, if animal protein is something that you should even be considering to begin with. You know, like I said, in this country, it's, you know, but if you happen to end up in Italy and you want a piece of fish every now and again, I might nod my head a little bit just to say it's okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about glyphosate. And I think in the past, I threw this word around quite a few times. And I talked about glyphosate, and it's, you know, I always reference it as an endocrine disruptor because it's most commonly known as a pesticide. Okay. And glyphosate as a pesticide is used to, you know, keep all the plants that we're spraying, you know, safe from all of the insects that are going to want to consume them. Since we're mass producing all of this food, we have to protect them. And we're not just protecting them from, you know, locusts and things that are going to want to consume those plants. We're also protecting them from important insects such as honeybees. So glyphosate is, most people also know it as Roundup. Okay. And Roundup is a compound or a chemical that's used as a pesticide. It's owned by two pharmaceutical companies, actually. And there's some very interesting history. I will not mention it on Zoom, but there's some very interesting history that goes all the way back to Bayer. And depending on how far back in history, you can actually see where they came from. But glyphosate is a very toxic chemical. Okay. So glyphosate I have in here is used for large variety of crops, including, okay, apples, apricots, almonds, asparagus, canola, okay, which you'll recognize, cherries, corn, cotton, all right, dates, grapes. Now, even though you may say we don't really consume cotton, we use cotton, we wear cotton. Cotton may be on different devices that we use to control bleeding during the mensa. Cotton is, we're constantly exposed to cotton. So, you know, a lot of the things that we're coming into contact with are treated with this glyphosate, okay, this chemical, this endocrine disruptor, which translates to something that interferes with how the human body interprets and utilizes hormones, specifically estrogen in the human body, okay? There's several studies linking glyphosate to interfering with how the body reads estrogen in relation to breast cancer. So there, as I'm pretty sure everyone already heard about the studies and how they found that glyphosate was causing cancer based on those who were exposed to it for long periods of time. It's just something that we're still using. It's still in our food, and we're not getting rid of it anytime soon. Even if they stop using it today, it would still be in our soil, and it would take probably about 10 years for the plants to clean up the glyphosate that's in the soil currently to get rid of it. We would need tons of sunflower plants, because sunflowers are known for being able to pull out certain toxins. But the sad part is we put the sunflowers and we make sunflower oil, and good luck finding something that doesn't have sunflower oil in it. So I have a question. Which crop holds the most glyphosate within its structure upon exposure? I'm going to open that question up. Who wants to take a stab at it?
Well, everyone's on mute, so you guys can put it in the chat if you think you know, but you can tell us the answer.
All right. I'll give you a few seconds to take your guesses.
You're getting a lot of guesses for corn. We have oats.
Mm-hmm. You ready?
So two so far are corn, wheat,
Uh-huh. Okay. Those are good.
apples,
Apples. Ah, that's actually like number 3, actually. Apples
soybeans,
are
cotton,
mhm,
potatoes,
nice.
strawberries.
So apples, I'm just going to touch on apples very quickly. Apples are high in glyphosate because the genetic modified version of the apple actually is modified to produce its own glyphosate within its DNA structure. So the DNA produces it from the inside out, and then they spray it on top of that. So it's getting like a double dose. So when you consume an apple, its cellular structure is actually still pumping out glyphosate after you digest it. Like it's constantly in production. This is how they modify the apple so that they wouldn't have to fight off as much insects with the glyphosate, but they still end up doing it. So the answer is almonds. Almonds actually get sprayed the most and end up having the most most of the glyphosate absorbed into the cell structure. Now, the interesting part is that how many of us like almond milk? You know, we are all running to the store, almond milk over that dairy milk, right? Anytime something becomes popular, I always say, you better ask the question, what are they doing to it? Okay. So prior to now, it's going to be a lot easier now to find non-dairy versions of milk without the carrageenan. Okay. And we know that that's a no-no for us. That is that's an omega-6 fatty acid that has been known to actually be inflammatory. As a matter of fact, scientists will inject carrageenan in rats to trigger an inflammatory response if they're looking to test things out so that they can pretty much activate disease in the rat. So if they are trying to activate celiac disease to test some new medication, that's what we would use to inject that rat to activate the celiac disease, because it's such a huge inflammatory agent. Okay, so is the rapeseed oil as well. Both of them are used as thickening agents, but when combined with glyphosate, okay, you got a thickening agent, which is a lipid and a fat, combined with an endocrine disruptor. And remember, anything that mimics hormones is going to bind to a fat, because what are hormones? They are composed of lipids. 90% of them are fat. You now have something very sinister going on in your small intestines. Okay, it's going to be going on in your small intestines and your liver. We're going to talk about some ways that you guys can detoxify that as you're moving forward as well. Okay, so almonds receive the most exposure of Roundup, aka glyphosate, than any of the other crops. Apples, I think, was like a close 2 or 3. Now we still, of course, the common ones like gluten, wheat, soy, all of those, they're still very high on the list. The problem with the gluten is that we continuously genetically modify it to the point where I think we're on a 73rd or 4th version of its modification. And now we don't really have to spray it as much because it just reeks of glyphosate. It's all embedded in its DNA structure. Nothing wants to touch it. So if you picked almonds, kudos to you. I was actually shocked myself. And there were some that are not on the list that are worthy mentions now because they're on the rise. Chickpeas, lentils, red lentils, chickpeas, and peas, like the regular old peas that we like our pea-based proteins to be made from. Okay, those are worthy mentions because they're actually up on the rise now. And of course, every animal protein mix you find these days, especially the ones for our vegan weightlifters and bodybuilders, most of them are made from peas as an alternative to the soy, because the soy, we've ruined that in this country as well. And a lot of, especially the weightlifters and the bodybuilders, they don't, the men are not going to want to use the soy-based because it's more phytoestrogenic. So they switched to peas, but now the peas are pulling up the glyphosate. So it's still, you're still running in the same gambit, sadly. So we're going to switch gears a little bit. And, somebody said, so I can still have my mushroom burger, right? So we're going to talk about one of the common mushrooms that, a lot of my plant-based companions would like to go into using because it reminds them of meat. Okay, you can slice it up and put it on a burger, chop it up. It's thick, it's meaty. It's almost like it's too good to be true because it is. So I'm going to ruin it for you. All right. Anybody want to guess what that mushroom is?
Portobello.
You got it. Bingo. All right. We're going to talk about the portobello mushroom, and I'm going to dive in just a little bit. All right. So I want to play this very short clip by Paul Stamets. He's an American mycologist. And he's an American mycologist, but he's almost like the mycologist in the world. Like, he is absolutely amazing, hands down. This man loves mushrooms through and through. And I follow a lot of his work. And he's one of the ones that got me into getting into mycology and learning more about mushrooms, from a first person experience. And he was recently, well, not too recent, this was about a couple of years ago, he was on the Joe Rogan show, which some of you may be familiar with. So I'm going to play the short clip and how he responded when he was questioned about the portobello mushroom.
What are the negative benefit or the negative effects of this?
This is an explosive area of conversation, and puts my life in danger. So I reserve the right not to answer your question.
Whoa, I didn't expect that. It puts your life in danger talking about portobello mushrooms? He's looking at me silently. I will respectfully move on.
Thank you.
So anybody who's interested, just Google that and get back to me.
So I'm going to dive in and say just a few of the things that he did not want to say, but I'm not going to go all the way in because I'm not going to go too far in. But it is a very deep rabbit hole, I will say that. And it just keeps snowballing the deeper you go. So let's see here. What do we have? All right. So off on the side here, I have, when it comes to food, where you guys can read it. I don't want to touch any extra buttons, so I got a lot of it covered on my screen. I don't want to disappear again on you guys. But basically, in short, that's, when something's plentiful and cheap, we always want to ask the question again, what are they doing to make this so plentiful and cheap? And when you go into the market and you go buy some mushrooms, if you're putting mushrooms in your stuffing, You're going to get those white button mushrooms, those crimini mushrooms, those baby bella mushrooms. All of those are all part of the same genus. They're all the same species. And those particular mushrooms are always plentiful, and they're the cheapest ones. You buy those, you're going to spend about $3.99. You go buy some shiitake or some maitake, you're going to spend quite a bit of money on some maitake. You're going to spend anywhere between $8 on up for a small amount of maitake or shiitake mushrooms. Those are real mushrooms. Those are the mushrooms you want to buy, okay? All of the baby white button, crimini, baby bella, and full-size portobello mushrooms are all part of the same species. It's called Agaricus bisporus. They're the same group, okay? The only difference is that the white button mushrooms are like the toddler of that mushroom. So initially, before the portobello turns to that deep, rich brown, it's just a small little white button mushroom, all right? All of them are part of the same genus, just different ages, okay? All of them contain 2 compounds that are of worthy mention. Now, there are some health benefits to the portobello mushroom. I didn't name them, but they do have some anti-inflammatory compounds in them. They're generally healthy. They have some protein as well, but there's 2 compounds that are very concerning. One is called agaritine, okay, in relation to the agaricus mushroom or the Agaricus bisporus. The agaritine is a mutagenic compound and it alters DNA, okay? The minute it gets into your system, it's going to your cell walls and it's telling your cell walls to do something a little different. And as we know, a cancer cell is basically your cell that just went awry. It just switched its gears and went somewhere else, okay? So agaritine is a mutagenic compound that alters DNA. Agaritine, when consumed in the human body, converts to hydrazine. Hydrazine is a chemical that is closely related to rocket fuel. So if you remember in the short video, he said this is an explosive topic. That was his very low blow into trying to say this has something to do with something you shouldn't be exposed to. So he was basically calling it like it was, saying that it is rocket fuel. Okay, so the same fuel that we put in rockets and we shoot up into space, that's what hydrazine is. And these compounds are found inside the portobello mushroom. Now, the benefit, or what was well known in its safety, is that both the agaritine and the hydrazine are supposed to be neutralized when you cook them. So as long as you cook them super well, you should be fine. But the rabbit hole got deeper for me. So I'll touch on some of it here and then you'll see why and can probably put 2 and 2 together. So both the agaritine and the hydrazine are classified as class 2 carcinogens, okay? They're being placed in the same category as cigarettes. The difference between hydrazine and agaritine compared to cigarettes is cigarettes will generally produce tumors in the lungs or the pulmonary area, right? Hydrazine and agaritine can produce them anywhere in the body. They can show up in the brain, they can show up in the bladder, they can show up in the liver. They just pick an area where there's damaged tissue, probably a lot of candida, and that's where they'll grow if they happen to have an opportunity to become prolific within the human body. Okay, it doesn't care. It doesn't isolate to one area. That's the big difference between it. It's only one step away from plutonium as far as its level of toxicity, and it's still grouped as may or may not cause cancer, but class 2 is not far from class 1. Now, again, I mentioned already, cooking thoroughly should neutralize both the agaritine and the hydrazine, as both are heat sensitive compounds. So this last slide is a bonus.
I
here.
always use.
Oh, there we go. Developed, it's CRISPR. I'm pretty sure some of us are familiar with this company, okay? They're very well known for changing and rewriting DNA and mRNA sequences and things like that. And they developed a durable strain of the Agaricus bisporus by re-scrambling its current DNA to give it longer life. And they did this, so they said they did it so that the white button mushrooms can stay white on the shelf for a long period of time. And they didn't enter in their re-scrambling, they did not introduce any new proteins to the DNA. They didn't alter it or genetically modify it by the traditional definition, so that it can, the genetic modification didn't allow it to produce its own pesticides or anything of that nature. So what ended up happening is that the EPA and the FDA will not consider it a genetic modification. The DNA was scrambled, but it bypassed a loophole. So on the right, I actually have actually, this is let me see if I can get it to, oops, uh-oh, I lost it. Let me see if I can go back, hold on. There we go. Yeah, this was supposed to actually play for you guys, but basically this is a short video on the CRISPR and how they were able to bypass the EPA and FDA and not allowing the white button mushrooms and the rest of the Agaricus bisporus as being classified as genetically modified. So technically it's organic. So, you know, we were running to the store buying all these wonderful mushrooms, but technically they're genetically modified because they re-scrambled its DNA so that the proteins can survive for a longer period of time. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Recent studies have shown that spores that are produced by these genetically re-scrambled mushrooms can sustain a temperature higher than 115 degrees Fahrenheit than that of the actual mushroom itself, meaning you may have cooked your mushroom, but the spores still live or may still live. And it only takes one spore, you know, to get the job done to begin whatever it needs to begin. So, you know, the traditional, especially if the traditional cooking methods were to the minute, you may find that, you know, you may still have issues or imbalances because this hydrazine and agarikine is still getting into the system. And if it has the ability to populate, you know, as mold does get into the body, things like candida is a mold, and essentially mushrooms are pretty much in the same category. You know, we can still foresee some issues and imbalances in the future. So we want to be very mindful that just because it says organic, just because it says genetically modified, there are so much political tape that's involved that we sometimes have to go really, really deep in order to know exactly what's good for us. So, you know, what are we going to do? You know, it's a catch-22. You switch from the animal protein, you leave the steak alone, you start leaving the dairy alone, you go pick up a portobello mushroom burger, and you're still asking questions like, why do I feel this way? What's going on? I did all the things to kind of get you to come back, to keep us in that loop where we're still in a state of perpetual illness. Okay, so what do we do? All right, so fighting glyphosate, some of the things that we can do to protect ourselves from glyphosate. You want to begin eating lots of cruciferous vegetables. Okay, cruciferous vegetables are going to help to rebalance some of the phytoestrogens that are found in the body. All right. Taking methionine, roughly between 250 milligrams. I have seen people take 500 milligrams. What methionine is an amino acid that helps the liver remove estrogen off of the liver, because estrogen can get blocked and it sometimes get held off in the liver, especially in cases where there are hormonal imbalances. The infradian rhythm is a little off. You may have like an extended luteal phase, and your follicular phase may only be like 5 days. Things like that can actually be contingent upon the liver and the adrenals, because these are two organs that are constantly assisting in the regulation of estrogen. So estrogen and phytoestrogens are everywhere, and they're essentially behind a lot of the endocrine disruption that the body or our bodies are experiencing as we're going through our day-to-day trying to, you know, eat right. So a small dose of about 250 milligrams of methionine will help to assist the liver, especially if you're plant-based, because remember, plant-based means you're going to likely have limited amounts of protein, and methionine is one of the hardest forms of protein to get your hands on because it's primarily found in meats. Now, you can do some interesting food combinations to increase your methionine absorption. For example, you can consume quinoa with kidney beans, and that'll get you a healthy amount of methionine if you do that combination, but no one wants to eat that like every day. So, you know, I would just opt to just get a small dose of methionine and just take that on a daily basis. Of course, keep detoxing. If you're detoxing is part of your lifestyle now. This is something that we should be doing on a seasonal basis. You may not be, you know, doing intermittent fasting or, You may just be juicing, or maybe you're doing a long extended fast for several days. Whatever it is that you're doing, you want to make sure you're doing that seasonally. When the season shifts, the body activates HGH. It's going to activate its own personal ability to become subject to change. That's when the body is ready to make adjustments, to change to its new environment. That's when you want to hit that reset button. Okay, we do seasonal detoxes. Every season, we're giving out a new detox, and the detoxes are according to the seasons, because that's when the body is ready for change. So I'm going to be doing another detox. I'll talk about it at the end. This coming January, I think it's on the 22nd. And this one is going to be specifically for parasite removal, because when it's cold outside, that's when the parasites like to get hyperactive, because we're consuming more animal protein. You may be consuming more fish. You may be exposing yourself to the foods that has the parasites in it. Okay. Shopping at your local farmers markets. I mean, if you have a local farmers market, definitely go there, especially if you can have a relationship with the farmer, and you can ask them what they're using and how they're farming. These are things that are going to make a huge difference. You can always, of course, organic food at your food stores when the local farmers markets are unavailable. The issue with that is, like I said, Appeal is this new gas compound that is supposed to help fruits and vegetables look and become fresher for a longer period of time to extend its life on the shelf. And the sale of the dollar takes a higher level of importance than the health and nutrition of the people purchasing the product. So just keep that in mind. And even Whole Foods, there's been some interesting posts that I've seen where people are trying to get in touch with Whole Foods, and Whole Foods is just not answering any questions. They don't even want to let you know that they're going to be using, what they're using to keep their foods fresh. And they can still be labeled organic, they're still going to be given that organic stamp of approval. And now we have to dive in and start doing a little bit more digging and research, because, we keep running the same cycle and still having the same problems. People are still getting sick. No one's getting healthier. As Western medicine becomes more advanced, people are just getting sicker as time goes on. Okay. Also, taking your supplements, especially B complexes. I think like maybe 80% of my clients come in B complex deficient. Okay. You can always spot a B complex deficiency if you ever examine your tongue and you start seeing small little cracks and fissures in your tongue. If you see like a huge split right down the middle of your tongue, then that's going to say that you have a very significant and severe B complex deficiency. B complex, and I do mean, when I say the complex, I mean the whole thing. That means from B1 all the way down to 17 and beyond. We're looking at all of those pieces. In order for any B vitamin to function in the human body, it needs the other pieces. The history of pharmacy, which controls nutrition. Okay, we want to keep in mind the same people we purchase our medications from are the same people we get a lot of our supplements from. Okay, they sell us the supplements. So you can look up Pfizer, and they own half of the companies that we purchase our supplementation and B vitamins and multivitamins. So what ended up happening is that when they found out that a certain vitamin was extremely helpful in sustaining human life and preventing disease, they broke it up into pieces, and it became a complex. And when a person starts to have low energy, they start reaching for vitamin B12. And what happens? The B12 works for a month, maybe two, and then all of a sudden it doesn't work for you anymore. And you're still vitamin B12 deficient, even though you're taking 2 pills per day. And your energy isn't getting any better. So what's going on? Well, what they didn't tell you is that in order for that B12 to work, it still needs to have all of the other parts of its vitamin functioning. Same thing happened with vitamin E. Vitamin E is probably like one of the most important. Like, it's a fat soluble vitamin that we got to have it in our system. It's part of what helps maintain your cardiovascular health. It's oftentimes connected to a lot of the imbalances that we have when it comes to like blood pressure, cardiovascular output. Vitamin E is commonly known as tocopherol. And that's what you're going to find in a store, tocopherol, all the time. No one ever talks about tocotrienols. Vitamin E will not work without the tocotrienols. You got to have tocopherol and tocotrienols. And I can guarantee you go in a vitamin shop and you ask them for both of those compounds in one, you're going to spend about $40 for that bottle of vitamin E. But it's going to be the vitamin E that's going to make a difference. Within 2 to 3 weeks, you're going to notice a huge difference. You may notice that it's easier to breathe. You're running up and down stairs a lot easier. Okay, so I said that to explain how the B complexes were broken into pieces as well. And as they broke these into pieces, we started isolating one compound or one part of the complex and expecting it to do its job, and then it doesn't. And now we're going back to the doctor. So some of the natural forms that I always suggest, because the natural forms of B complexes, these have most, if not all, of the pieces, okay? This is going to set the template for you to add in additional B vitamins if your body needs it. So if you're low on energy, you have iron deficiencies or what have you, take this first before you take a B12. Moringa powder. A lot of us are familiar with moringa powder. It has probably some of the most nutrient dense, it's one of the most nutrient dense plants on the planet. It's loaded and packed with a lot of B complexes. That's what makes it work. That's what makes it give that high energy output that it has, because it has all of the B vitamins, not just B12. Nutritional yeast is another good one, okay? You can take about a tablespoon to a tablespoon and a half of nutritional yeast, sprinkle it over some popcorn or some salad, or make some vegan mac and cheese, whatever you want to do with it. And that nutritional yeast will also have a full spectrum of B complexes as well. The special part with the nutritional yeast is because yeast and bacteria is what's needed to activate B vitamins. So if you don't have good bacteria or good flora and fauna, you can be popping B12 and B complexes all day. They will never get turned on as they enter the intrinsic factor. So these are two really good options to build a solid foundation before you start introducing specific B vitamins that are going to help promote your health in the future. All right, and then you can get into the different ones like the B5, the B6, the B1. These are all really good choices that you would want to take regularly. I personally take B1 like daily, especially if I happen to have a cup of coffee. I'll save you the coffee thing. That's a whole nother rabbit hole. But unless you guys want me to, then I'll dive into it. I'm drinking tea now. So, but especially if I'm drinking coffee, vitamin B1 is a must. If you're having carbohydrates, like any type of starches, pasta, bread, rice, quinoa, whatever, you're supposed to have vitamin B1. You have a cup of coffee, vitamin B1. You have matcha tea, vitamin B1. Anything with caffeine, you need additional vitamin B1. Sugar, caffeine, and starch does not occupy the same space at the same time with vitamin B1. They cancel one another out, okay? So when you introduce sugar, you're not only canceling out the B1, you also cancel out your vitamin C, because vitamin C competes with sugar as well. Sugar is a whole nother topic. We won't dive into that. But and then moving on, how to stay healthy. Don't be afraid to ask questions. You know, if something, doesn't seem right, this just seems so plentiful and there's so much oats milk out there, ask the questions, turn it around, take a picture of the ingredients, and don't be afraid. Give the company a call. Ask them what is in their natural flavors, because that's a whole nother story when you get into what natural flavors actually is and what they hide behind when they don't want to tell you. It's an easy answer to say natural flavors. And then, of course, this isn't the last one. Expand your horizon of natural health techniques. Okay. So, beyond plants, beyond herbs, beyond supplementation, there is a whole nother world out there. And there is so many different techniques that you can use and practices. You've gotten a chance to see Miss Hayat, and she's like absolutely amazing. I still see her regularly for colonic hydrotherapy. That is a wealth of knowledge and information, as well as a tool that you can use to give you the edge that you need while we're living in, fighting this uphill battle, trying to maintain our health. Chiropractors, and I also want to mention, art therapy and mental health and physical activities. These are things that are part of the holistic approach. It's about looking at the whole picture, not just isolating one part. the whole picture, which includes the mind, the body, as well as the spirit. You know, your spiritual practices, that's also a huge factor in your overall health and well-being. I've actually indulged in art therapy, and I must say that that has been some of the most heart healthy healing that I've engaged in. And maybe one day I'll introduce Miss Janelle. She's absolutely amazing when it comes to utilizing art to express hidden meanings or hidden feelings that can be trapped within our heart that we have to release, and how the art becomes an actual expression. Okay, because sometimes we don't get a chance to release things, and we hold on to things, and holding on to emotions is no different than, you know, being constipated. Okay, you're just carrying around all of this debris, and it's never going anywhere, and eventually it can cause a lot of damage inside the body, or it explodes and causes damage outside of the body. In any case, it's damage that we want to try to prevent, we want to try to mitigate, and we want to release, we want to get rid of things. That's the whole purpose of detoxification. Detoxification is the process of removing things from your life that you don't need, that you no longer require to have, so that you can make room for the things that you do want in your life. And of course, physical activities, yoga and stretching, I think, especially as we're getting older, yoga and stretching is probably going to be one of the most important things that we can do, especially in the midsection region of our bodies where the iron girdle sits. That is such a blood-rich area, and it's oftentimes very congested. And when it becomes congested, it leaves very little blood to be prolific going in other places of the body. So you want to make sure that you are stretching those areas. You're doing your stretches, you're doing your yoga, you know, or whatever that looks like, because you want to make sure that that blood has movement. Okay. We want to also stretch out the blood vessels. Stretching them is going to help to extend them and also give way to its pliability. It's going to give it some more flexibility. And we want flexibility. That's what keeps our blood pressure nice and regulated. And of course, most important, and my personal favorite, get outside and enjoy nature. Get outside. I know it's cold, and I still go outside. Like I'm going out tomorrow. And I know it's cold, but we still want to make sure that we are enjoying this beautiful planet that God made us in all of its glory. Its winter phase is still beautiful. It's still absolutely lovely when you see the snow falling, and the plants, they'll talk to you. You're going to walk past a plant and it's going to be green, and you're going to say, why is this plant green? And it's January and there's snow on the ground. And likely it's telling you that I have something that you need that is going to keep you healthy and get you through the winter, just like the evergreen tree, which produces the pine needles. And pine needles make shikimic acid, which is used for cold, influenza, and other viruses and infections that you may come into contact with. And I think that is it. Oh, so I have a worthy mention of a few products. So on the far left is my nutrient blend sea moss. So on my website, I have where I took the sea moss, the 3 sea mosses. I took green, red, and the Chrontus crispus, and I dehydrated them and basically ground them down into a powder. And what we have on there is, on the website, you can actually select your primary, secondary, and tertiary herbs that you would like to have blended in with your moss. Then you get the dehydrated mix, and you get to make that at home. Shipping sea moss, I don't know why anyone would ship sea moss. If it's done right, it technically should explode by the time it gets to your house. So I developed a way of making it so that it can actually be a mixed dry. And it's simple. When you get the dry mix, you just basically pour it into a saucepan in conjunction with 16 ounces of water, simmer it for about 15-20 minutes. You have sea moss gel. It's going to look like cake batter. You pour it in your mason jar, you stick it in the fridge, and it's ready to go. Now, the benefit to this one is that, again, you get to choose what herbs you would like to use. So I have on my list, I know I have, if I recall correctly, you have like some powerful adaptogens like Schizandra. You have hawthorn berry. I believe the leaves that you see in front of that one is uva ursi, which is, and when using with conjunction with dandelion, is a powerful diuretic, especially for those of us with issues with our kidneys or retaining fluid. And of course, ginger is always an option as well. So there's a lot of different combinations. Ashwagandha is on there that you can build your own sea moss so that your sea moss, because sea moss is supposed to be more of a carrier for the extract that you're combining with it. That's why people started putting things like elderberry in it. But I think that I have my own opinions about elderberry. Elderberry is a fantastic plant, but it should be used in conjunction with an adaptogen because it can rev up your immune system too high. So it does need some regulation. Same thing like echinacea, it needs a regulator. It's like having a thermostat in your car. The second product is my sea moss capsules. Those capsules, I actually made those specifically for people with B1 deficiencies. Okay, so in my sea moss capsules, aside from having the red, the green, and the yellow Chondrus crispus, I also added something called benthothiamine. And what benthothiamine is, it's a fat soluble form of vitamin B1, which means it's going to enter directly into the central nervous system and go straight to the brain. When your brain receives B1, it's almost like getting a cognitive boost. So you get that clarity of mind, that extra energy that you're looking for, as well as covering almost 92 trace elements and minerals, because it's not exactly 92 trace elements and minerals, but it's almost 92 trace elements and minerals. It also has Siberian ginseng, which functions as the adaptogen in that formula. And Siberian ginseng has been studied to also increase cognitive function, where they were using it in Siberia, Russia, China, for their Olympic athletes. And they were giving it to them because it removes oxidative stress, especially after heavy, intense workouts. And then they found that their college students were having increased GPA averages because their oxidative stress after studying was reduced, which means they had better recovery time. So if a person was doing a leg day, they may need 7 days to recover. Now you only need 5.5 or 6 days. And the last product is my antiparasitical. It's not on the website yet, but that is the base antiparasitical, although there will be a custom blend that is going to be in the parasite detox that's going to be coming up in January. And the base blend has the primary constituent is the clove and the witch hazel. And basically we extract that in an alcohol compound. And that's something that you would take for 5 to 7 consecutive days in conjunction with honey as a chase. And you would do that, and then you would take a 1 to 2 week break off. And then I would tell you to look in a toilet. And if you're gully, send me some pictures, because I like pictures. I want to see what comes out so I can try and identify it. I'm pretty sure, I don't know if some of you saw the horrifying video of poop that I had on YouTube, but I show some of the things that can come out of your body when you use the antiparasitical. And it's never a question of, if you have parasites, it's more of a question of how many, what type, and how long have they been there. Okay, we all have them, even when you're plant-based. Our bodies want them there. Okay, a lot of conditions and symptoms or dis-ease can occur due to parasite activity, because parasites are going to become active if you're exposed to metal toxicity, if you're exposed to, or you have issues with anemia or any type of deficiencies. Parasites will grow, they will take place and start doing the job that the human body is having difficulties doing, because they're getting hired out for that help. So bringing them under control at least 1 to 2 times per year. Any of us who are from the Caribbean or different areas of the world, parasite detoxification is like a 1 to 2 time a year thing. We do that 1 to 2 times a year. We get rid of the parasites, and then what happens? You go to school, especially if you're in grammar school. You come take this castor oil or whatever you were given, some black walnut, and then you go to school. Okay, why? Because parasites will interfere with your cognitive function. They're monitoring neurotransmitters in your prefrontal cortex, meaning they're going to activate dopamine every time you see a certain type of food that you don't want to have. So it's important to clear the mind first, clear the body of those parasites, and then send your child to school. And then, of course, here in the United States, nobody's ever thinking about parasites. My groups are like the only group that does it like every single year in January, February. We're flushing them down a toilet and starting fresh, at the beginning of the year with less tenants, taking up space in my abdomen. And this is the last slide. This is the winter parasite detox. Yeah, it's January 22nd to February 22nd. So it's roughly a month long. And it includes, well, the items aren't included, but it does, for this one, we do have an ionized colloidal that's included. And you also get the custom parasite tincture. I think I'm doing 2 presentations. Ms. Hayat is doing 2 presentations. I have a kinetic yoga instructor, and I also have an art therapist. And basically, we have all of these programs are going to be coming up at random times during the week throughout the entire process. So there's anywhere between 1 to 3 Zoom meetings per week. We record them, so in case if you miss it, you can always catch up on it later, because we do have a large group that participates from California, so they tend to miss things, and then they'll just watch them later on. We also have a large group chat. We use the Signal app because it's encrypted, so I get to say whatever I want, as well as share. I like to share some, I guess the best way to put it, ancient practices of natural medicine that Western medicine may, not smile kindly upon. But these are things that our ancestors have done and things that I do. So I never tell anyone to, I just, show a person what I do, and then I do it. And I've been doing it for years, and I've only had nothing but results from it. And my blood work can show it as well. And I think that is it. Yes. All right, hopefully I didn't take too long. I usually have a lot of information and I get distracted. All right, so.
Thank you. That was a lot of information. And I just want to say to everyone that's on here, so there's over 100 people on here tonight. So you all are here for a reason. And I would assume that the reason is that you want to improve your health. And so in HeartSmarts, we have at this point 6 different levels of the program, with level 6 being the most advanced, who just completed the fully raw program. If you are new to the program, if you have never even been to one of these meetings before, all of this can be overwhelming. So start from where you are and don't try to do all of this at once. This meeting is open to all levels of people on their healing journey. And so start from where you are. Don't be overwhelmed. This video will be posted and available to you all afterwards. So just take a deep breath and we will move forward from there. So I think the first question, Coach Jay, is can you say all of that again? So for those of us who may have missed what you said, it's a joke. The first question really would be, I think in terms of where we are regarding plant-based and eating meat, what is your just quick and dirty answer of, should everyone be plant-based, or does it depend on the person's body? Because in the beginning, it sounded like you were saying there can be times when we can eat meat, but in this country, you don't want to eat the meat that's here. So if you're going to do that, you have to get a better quality of it. So for people who are trying to decide or understand if they should be plant-based or not, what is the answer to that? Is that the ultimate or optimal way to be eating?
The quick and dirty is find out what works best for you. And so I'll use myself as an example, because I have a very diverse diet, I guess. I do consume some quantities of dairy, and I also do consume some animal protein. When I consume animal protein, it's usually once every 45 days or so, or sometimes I go 3 to 6 months before I have animal protein. And the reason why is, one, it's going to be based on the cycles. Okay. So, and I'm also a type O blood type, and type O's have a very good, are supposed to have really high digestive acids. Now, when you have very high digestive acids or high IgA levels, elevated IgA levels don't mix well with things that are alkaline or caustic. Okay, AKA beans. That's why I have a gripe with the beans sometimes, because beans actually will bloat me. Whereas a piece of animal protein, as long as it's a small piece at the right time of the year, I can digest that animal protein. Also, the choice of animal protein is really important for me as well. So, for example, I don't eat things that are common. I haven't had chicken in years. Chicken, I think, is the primary contributor that ruined my testosterone. I never recommend chicken to anyone, even if they are an animal protein eater. I tell them to stop eating chicken, especially if you're a type B blood type. Type Bs particularly are sensitive to a toxin found in poultry that actually inhibits their magnesium absorption. So then they start having blood pressure issues and kidney issues and anything connected with any of the 325 different functions that magnesium is related to. But when I do choose an animal protein, I'm either I'm going out into the forest or the river and I'm catching it myself, which usually includes a piece of fish. And, there's like an intimate connection of honoring that animal. I don't want to get, too weird, but there's a certain aspect that the animal's DNA based on its emotions can hold. DNA is just information lodged into the proteins. So depending on the experiences of that animal, we're going to end up digesting that animal's information. So when we're eating the traditional meats found in the store, we don't know what that cow went through. And if you go on YouTube and you look up what that cow actually went through before it became cow's meat and the process that it had to endure, you're not going to want to eat a cow, not in good conscience. Same thing with the chicken. There's a couple of really good videos on YouTube that you can watch they're pretty brutal when you learn about the grape rack and what these animals have to go through, and their lifespans are supposed to be 25 years and they're cut down to 5 years because of stress, anxiety, and depression. Okay. So then we come behind and we're trying to, bless our food in 2 minutes, and giving blessings and thanks in 2 minutes when this animal has had 5 years of pain, torture, and mayhem in its life. And it's not a good trade-off. Okay. So, where you get your animal protein from is also key. And I think that's one of the things that separates, us from like the Hansa people, because they're growing their own animals, they're caring for their animals, and they're not abusing them either. They're taking small quantities, when the time is right. So when I do consume animal protein, it's going to be something that's odd. I'm either catching it myself and I'm honoring it myself, or, I happen to be outside the country, or, it's something weird like, I might do goat, I might do lamb, anything that's not popular. The minute it becomes popular, I'm asking a question. I'm like, okay, what did they do to it? What did they do to make this particular animal reproduce itself fast enough so that it can meet the demand of the American people? What did they do to the chicken and the egg? Okay, because anyone who owns chickens know that chicken isn't laying an egg every single day. How many eggs are these chickens laying? They had to do something to the chicken's ability to increase its reproductive system, meaning it was given estrogen. And you can't cook out a hormone when you put it in the frying pan. You have to, you can't get rid of it. Once it's in there, it's in there. And then this is where the process of bioaccumulation comes from. So I guess, for all that to say, the hard, dirty truth is I do a little animal protein, probably 1 to 2 times per year. I still consider myself plant-based. There are some plants that I would consider probably worse than animal protein. Like I would rather tell someone to eat a steak than a white potato or to have white rice, because the sugar content is going to be way worse than, if you actually are able to process that steak. As far as dairy, I have indulged in small quantities of goat's milk, but I ferment it. So I actually take I go to a farm, I get my goat's milk, I get a small amount. And then what I'll do is I'll add kefir grains to it, and then I'll grow it into kefir. And then I'll consume anywhere between 1 to 2 ounces, 1 to 2 times, I don't know, per month for about maybe 60 to 90 days or whenever I think about it, which isn't often. And then I just leave it in the fridge. Like I think I still have one in there from like a year ago, and it's still full. Kefir does offer some of the best bacteria I've ever been able to get my hands on, because when what they did is they pasteurized and homogenized the milk, and then they started to grow kefir grains, and then they put it in the store for you to buy. That's trash. When you get your hands on real milk, whether it's real breast milk, real cow's milk, real goat's milk, especially the goat's milk, because the goat's milk is better for type O digestion. So I'll get the goat's milk and then I'll grow the kefir grains in the goat's milk. And when I take that, I notice a huge improvement in the bacterial flora and fauna, because what happens is you're really not consuming the milk per se. The bugs then ate the milk up. They're digesting everything. They turned it into a complete food at that point. And now you're consuming the bacteria, because the goal is you want to get that bacteria back into your system. And we live in a place now where bacteria is like bad. Everywhere you go, everyone's scared of the bacteria. We're Lysoling everything away. We're trying to kill bacteria. No, we're 90% good bacteria. We want bacteria. And a lot of the bacteria that we're missing is found in the fermented foods. Of course, this doesn't mean you don't have to limit yourself to kefir. There are other options of fermented foods as well, such as sauerkraut and kimchi, kombucha, things like that. I have an issue with the kombucha because of the acid, unless I grow the kombucha myself, which I've also done. So it really depends. That's what works best for me. But for the most part, I'm plant-based. Like I'll be plant-based all the way until probably fall of 2024. I'm not going to have any more animal protein. I had one small piece during Thanksgiving and I regretted it because I felt like trash afterwards. And that was like a reminder, like, for me to wait until I actually go out into the forest. And, if I just so happen to catch a trout, then I might bring that one back home, because trout is supposed to be one of the best fish for type O's to digest.
Okay. Thank you for that. So there's a bunch of questions, and so I'm thinking most likely we're going to have to invite you back if you're available in January, because as you know, when you come, all of the questions start coming up and we don't want to keep you too long tonight. So if your question doesn't get asked tonight, we will graciously ask Coach Jay to join us again in January for another session. And so please be mindful that there are a lot of questions this evening. And so the first question, and these can be quick answers if possible, are there any herbs for migraines, sugar craving, and brain fog?
Migraines, sugar cravings, and brain fog. So if I'm looking at sugar cravings, the first one that usually pops to mind, if you're trying to combat the sugar cravings, now this doesn't get to the root cause of it, because sometimes it can be interconnected with overgrowth of candida, especially if it's translocating. But there is anything that's bitter is going to change the receptors in the tongue to send a different signal to the brain. But there is one particular herb called Gymnema sylvestre, and that one they call the sugar destroyer. Oftentimes it's given to people who are diabetic, especially if you're trying to curb the sugar. It is not a cure-all for type 2 diabetes, though. A lot of people will say that that's the case, but all it's really doing is trying to change the receptors in your tongue to send a different signal to your brain so that you don't like sugar. But type 2 diabetes is more in depth on that. There's a lot of other imbalances that have to be corrected. What was the other two? You said sugar
migraines and brain fog.
Migraines are almost 9 times out of 10 a gut problem. One of the things that works, if you can actually try this next time you get a migraine. What you're going to do is you're going to go and you're going to get 2 teaspoons of thyme out of your cabinet. You're going to take the 2 teaspoons, or you're going to make yourself a cup of tea. 2 teaspoons is going to go in 6 ounces of boiled water, and you're going to steep it for about 10 minutes. You're going to drink it. If your headache goes away, you have a gut issue. Okay. Most migraines are gut issues. Migraines, vertigo. As a matter of fact, I made a compound for my auntie who suffers with vertigo, and I use thyme in that extraction. Thyme is basically settling her stomach because it's an anticonvulsant. And as an anticonvulsant, sometimes we don't have nerves in our stomach. Some certain parts of the stomach won't show pain or discomfort. But there's pain and discomfort there. There's stagnancy. There's something's not moving. You may have a small pocket of either trapped emotion. It could be trapped poop. There could be a parasite. It could be anything. Sometimes it likes to sit right in the transverse colon where the prolapse is, and it doesn't move. And when it starts to shake or quiver, that translates to the brain. And then the brain has this disproportionate amount of fluid, and that's what causes the migraine, because we don't have nerves there either. So that's why they can do brain surgery and not use anything to numb the pain per se, because there's no nerves there. So, but taking 1 to 2 teaspoons of thyme, okay, and then adding it to about 6 ounces of boiled water, let it steep for 10 minutes. If you want to add a little honey, you can. Drink that. If your headache goes away in about 10 to 15 minutes, 9 times out of 10, you have a gut issue. And then, what was the last one? Migraine, sugar, and
brain fog.
Oh, brain fog. Brain fog can be a number of things. Brain fog can be estrogen based. Brain fog can be candida. Brain fog can be a lot of different things. Both of those are going to be complex. I would say that if you notice some clarity after like a parasite cleanse or even a 30-day candida cleanse, 9 times out of 10, it's bacterial based. But if it's estrogen based, which is also very common because of the large consumption of endocrine disruptors we have, estrogen is what's needed for the hippocampus to communicate to the prefrontal cortex, and that can slow down the thought process as well, especially in women. Okay, because remember, you guys need more estrogen. You have smaller brains by mass, but the hippocampus is 30 to 40, 35% larger, which means you're smarter than us. It's a fact. I piss men off all the time, but it is what it is. So, but you require more estrogen for that synapse to work. Okay. So if the estrogen is off balance because you need it down in your adrenals and you got it, some of it's trapped in your liver, and then you may have other endocrine disruptors that can cause brain fog. Okay. It can also cause stress, anxiety, depression, mood swings, forgetfulness. All of that is interconnected with estrogen. In order for men to have a fully functioning brain, not only do we have to have testosterone, but we have to stay testosterone dominant so that the estrogen can get high enough. So I had to actually build up my estrogen in order to keep this little brain kind of, still working somewhat. So I would look at those two things, before looking at anything else. I wish there was a quick answer for something that can improve both of those, but both of them are something that's going to definitely require detoxification and further improvement of overall health.
And so, Coach Jay, you mentioned earlier that you weren't going to go down the sugar rabbit hole, sugar addiction. But when I asked people to share what they're struggling with, the majority put in the chat that it's sugar and sugar cravings, sugar addiction, sugary foods. So we don't mind if you go down that rabbit hole, because I think, if anything, I think people can stop the meat and maybe even perhaps the dairy, but something about the sugar has a hold on them. And so if you can talk more about what that is and perhaps maybe strategies for getting off of that.
Sugar is like cocaine. It's no different. It literally is cocaine. It is probably one of the hardest things that you'll break yourself off of. And it's like me and the mac and cheese. You're just going to be scratching yourself like your name's Pookie. And, but there are some techniques. One, don't lock yourself into feeling like you have to break away from the sugar completely. There are some options that you can kind of cycle in to get more out of your sugar. I always say that the most important sugar to avoid is going to be the starchy sugars, okay? Because those are the sneaky ones that sets you up for failure later, all right? If you're consuming rice, white potatoes, bread, those starchy foods, those are no different from Domino sugar. A white potato or an order of French fries, they're exactly the same as pouring a bowl of Domino sugar into a cup and consuming it. It's equally the same. And it also interferes with how the body is able to manage stress, how the body is able to manage good cognitive function, transketolase enzyme. All of those things are interconnected. Now, there are some other trick sweeteners people use. I see someone had mentioned the agave sweetener. I'm not the biggest fan of the agave. And that's mainly because during a lot of the detoxes, I actually prefer people take natural forms of glucose to a certain level. So if you're trying to break yourself off of those sugars, you definitely want to get rid of any of the white sugars. They have to go. And that includes the white starches as well. Okay. Consuming your foods in a particular order may also assist in increasing your ability to kind of fight off the sugar craving, because what causes the cravings for the starches and the sugars is that the body isn't satisfied. How do we satisfy the body? How do we strategize a plan to make the brain feel as though it finally got exactly what it needed? That means you have to have fats, because your body runs off of two fuels. It's either going to be sugar or it's going to be fat. And it has two different types of burners. So in order for your body to feel satisfied, where you feel like you can resist the sugar, you got to have a full spectrum lipid, a nice fat that's going to function as a fuel, because sugar activates insulin. Lipids do not, okay, or fats do not. Now, when you consume your food, now, of course, when I say sugar, that doesn't mean natural sugars, although I will say that there are some fruits out there that are, I mean, you might as well, have some domino sugar. Things like watermelon are exceedingly sweet. So if you have a problem with sugar, you're not going to want watermelon. If you have a problem with sugar, you might want to stay away from the pineapples. But if you are just consuming, you're trying to figure out a way to strategize to reduce your cravings, you're going to want to eat your food in a particular order. Start with fruit first. Okay, fruit first is going to prepare the body, prime it, and get it ready to break down those foods that are going to come after, which are going to be the proteins and the fats, because that's what's going to decide how your brain responds. Okay, your brain is the determining factor as to whether or not you're going to want that slice of cake or pie afterwards. Okay, which is why you have to consume those first. Now, I even think Ms. Hayat was mentioning how technically we're supposed to have dessert first, not last. Dessert comes first because dessert gets processed like that. If it's sweet, you have ever had a Snicker bar before, and that Snicker bar runs through your system, you're doing backflips afterwards, and then you crash, right? Because it gets processed very quickly. Same thing happens with fruit. It has a very low transit time. It's going to go right through your system, get everything primed and ready for you to move into the next part, which is going to be your proteins, your beans, your avocado, if you're eating animal protein, your fish, whatever that looks like, whatever your choice protein is. I'm sorry, I skipped one. Before you eat your proteins, you're supposed to have your vegetables. Okay, so first is fruit, then comes your vegetables. What you want to do is when you consume your vegetables, you want to consume anywhere between 4 to 5 cups of vegetables. Okay, most of us have a small side salad and we call it a day. And when you consume that small amount of vegetables, you're not really allowing it to get into the system. Now, it doesn't mean it has to be a big salad. It could be broccoli. It could be, whatever you have most of. It could be spinach, anything that's cooked. All of those are fine, but you want to try to have at least 4 to 5 cups. So when you look at what 4 to 5 cups of vegetables look like, you're not leaving that much space left for your protein and your fats, which is what you want. Okay. After you consume your vegetables, then you're going to move on to your choice of protein. Your proteins can be, it might just be 2 handfuls of walnuts, that might fall into your salad, or you threw it over your spinach. It could be, some avocado, what have you. You want to make sure you take in ample amounts of protein. And then the most important part is to end off with your fats. The fat is what tells the brain, I'm done. Okay. If you have fat, your brain will be satisfied in 20 minutes, but you got to give your body 20 minutes. So what I do is I teach my clients that after they've consumed their meals in that order, before they have that rice or that pasta or a piece of bread, they have to wait 20 minutes. And what happens to 50% of them is after they wait 20 minutes, they don't want it, because it takes 20 minutes for the brain to register that it's full. So you got to give it that space. If you introduce a fat, that fat will tell the brain that it's now running off of a different fuel type. It's not running off of sugar, and it won't have to activate insulin. Okay. This is how we're able to intermittent fast throughout the day. So for example, when people do the modified intermittent ketogenic fasting and they'll drink a cup of coffee, what do they put in it? Tablespoon of butter, or they'll put MCT oil. They're adding a fat to it, because that fat and that caffeine will carry them till 3 o'clock. And from 6 in the morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they're going, and they didn't have any snacks. They didn't need any sugar. and they're able to sustain themselves. Why? Because when the brain starts processing fat, after that fuel runs out, it starts looking for more fat to burn, and then it looks to your body for the fat. Okay, so now it's going to start digging into any of the other fat tissue that you already have, and it starts to burn that as a particular fuel instead. Now, as far as I do alter it a little bit when it comes to, you know, my lady clients, because having starches is actually important during a particular phase, especially towards like the luteal phase of the menstrual cycle, the women's lunar cycle. I'm sorry. That part of the phase, actually, it works to your benefit to actually have more carbohydrates during that stage. And that's going to be the stage that is roughly 6 to 10 days before you have your mensa. Okay, so 6 to 10 days before your mensa shows up, you actually want to consume more carbohydrates. That translates to your fall season. And during your fall season, you're going to have a harvest, and your body is going to be looking to store things. And then when it stores it, it's storing for the winter, which becomes your actual mensa. So when you have your menstruation, that becomes your winter period. And now you have all the storage you need for your winter, because when winter comes, you're not going to have any fats during that time. So, you know, it is a little different for my female clients when I'm trying to follow the infradian rhythm. But for the most part, consuming your foods in that order and making sure that you have that 20-minute gap and taking ample amounts of fats will make a huge difference. And, you know, making sure that those fats are healthy fats. So your MCT oil, your coconut oils, your fatty nuts and seeds, things like your sunflower seeds, your pistachios. Those are going to be, maybe not almonds, but unless you import them. I think there's an almond called the Marcona almond, and you can get that. Those are imported. Those actually aren't too bad, and you can roast those up with some olive oil and some rosemary. They'll do just fine. But any of those healthy fats will make sure that you get that sustained. That's the strategy that I've used for myself as well as my clients as well, and it makes it pretty easy. And of course, running additional support with bitters is going to also counteract the signaling mechanisms that are associated with the tongue and that craving. There's always the emotional aspect. There's dopamine, which plays a huge part. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're removing dopamine resistance in our body, because we build up resistance to everything. The more you're exposed to dopamine, the more you resist it. Just like you can have cortisol resistance, you can have insulin resistance, you can have dopamine resistance. So making sure that there's a plan in place, making sure there's none of those foods that are going to trigger that dopamine, and starting to find other sources for joy as opposed to pleasure, because pleasure is fleeting, joy is everlasting. Making sure that you have those things in place. And when you start to have those cravings, this is when you go find a nice book to read, or you may decide you want to crochet, or you may want to engage in like art therapy or perform another activity. That's going to change the signaling mechanism, because sometimes it's based on a reward system. You know, the things that we are looking to reward ourselves for, that helps to trigger that dopamine. So there's a lot of moving mechanisms that works, you know, but from the holistic health coaching aspect, those are the techniques that I've used.
And so, Coach Jay, can you speak a little bit more about the gut microbiome and maybe even the parasites and their connection to sugar cravings?
So parasites have undergone a lot of genetic modifications, because we have been consuming genetically modified foods, you know, whether we were aware of it or, you know, whether they just decided not to tell us that it was a genetic modified mushroom. So what ends up happening is that the parasites, their job is, they have a couple of jobs. One, they are supposed to be helping to manage and scavenge metal inside the body. When we're exposed to metals and toxins, like, for example, if you've had like dental amalgams where you've had either dentures or implants or fillings in your teeth for 10, 15 years, you're going to have nanoparticulates get leaked into the system. And those nanoparticulates are going to be composed of either aluminum or thimerosal. They're going to be magnetically attracted to the central nervous system. And what ends up happening is that parasites gets requested by the body to help scavenge the metal. Now, as they're scavenging the metal, they are working in conjunction with other bacteria and fungus, namely Candida albicans. And what they do is they translocate throughout the body looking for places wherever there's damaged tissue. If you've ever had antibiotics or anything of those nature, when they start to move around, they start to go up into the buccal cavities and they get into your brain, and they start to control the release of dopamine every time you come into contact with certain foods, which is sugar, sweets, cookies, cakes, candy, pasta, rice, bread, and starch. All of those foods are going to be interconnected with those cravings because they're the ones that actually like to eat it. So you're consuming, sometimes we're consuming them because there's a parasite or a parasite working in conjunction with Candida albicans, triggering a dopamine release so that we can have this particular craving for that food. This is where you've seen someone have like a dopamine release. They're eating the donut. They're like, oh my God, this donut's so good. They're releasing dopamine like right in front of your eyes, and they're having that connection. And it's not their fault. It's really a neurotransmitter thing where the translocated fungus is telling your brain to release dopamine upon exposure to that food group, because that's what helps them to become prolific. That's what helps that particular bacteria to multiply and continue to do whatever it wants to do inside the body, which for Candida, its job is to recycle dead tissue. So it'll move into an area like, for example, if you've had like an injury, old shoulder injury, that's where they're going to go, because that's where your body is never quite healed all the way from. And, you know, when it rains outside, you can still feel it. That's Candida. They're moving into that area of the body because they're promising to fix and repair, but they never really fix and repair. They're like really bad contractors that leave beer cans every time they come over. So then the body ends up keeping them there, and then you have to feed them. And in order for them to eat, they want French fries. They want white potato. They want mashed potatoes. They want a donut. All of them are the same because all of them are like bleached sugars, and they're all going to help to increase the proliferation of those particular bacteria. Candida, specifically in the gastrointestinal system, they're supposed to be there, but they're not supposed to be there in abundance. Think of Candida like weeds. If something was to happen to the farmland and, you know, like say all the crops burnt down, okay, the first thing that's going to grow on that land is going to be what? Weeds. And they're going to compete for anything and everything else. That's Candida. They're competing. They're the fastest reproducing. So they're going to move in and they're going to grow, and they're going to grow fast. They're going to take over the land. So they have a job, you know, just like regular weeds do. They have a job. It's just that sometimes the exposure to antibiotics, which means anti-bio relates to anti-life, is going to wipe out all of the trash that we have. I mean, all of the good flora and fauna, put them into remission. And then here comes that particular fungus trying to take up the space, because something has to take up that space. So some tools that you can use to help to rebalance that, obviously doing a parasite cleanse is important. And always do parasite cleansing before you try to manage anything with Candida, because parasites will actually protect Candida. The parasites will put the Candida in stasis. You'll have a really good time. 30 to 60 days in, you're feeling great. And then all of a sudden you're going to see that donut and it's going to call you, and you're going to be like, I don't know what's happening, but I'm going to eat this donut, and you're just going to eat it. And it's not your fault. What ended up happening is that the parasites allow the Candida to go into stasis, and they will wait you out. They're smart like we are. They think, they plan. The only difference is they don't have Democrats and Republicans. They are basically just one unit, and they vote unanimously, and they're always talking to each other. The ones in the brain communicate with the ones in the stomach. They send something called an REM signaling mechanism to allow them to monitor your neurotransmitters, and they make an administrative decision to decide whether or not they're going to mutate, and then all of a sudden there's a yeast infection, or there's a skin breakout, or whatever that stress response is, or they're going to sit back and they're going to sit still and they're going to wait for the next one. That's how they work. They're unanimous. They work way better than, you know, us as humans do. They have one vote, one mind, one movement.
Awesome. And so the other rabbit hole that you said you didn't want to go down was coffee. And so there was a request for you to briefly go down that rabbit hole as well.
That's why I'm drinking tea right now. So, all right. So coffee, there's been some, I fell down a rabbit hole with coffee. I think I did a post on it. And basically what we was finding is that caffeine is, because initially I always said coffee's good, caffeine's good, God made it, so it's got to be great, right? So, but the problem is that, it's how the coffee is being processed. Coffee is another one of those groups of heavily treated with pesticides, especially if it's decaffeinated. So we have to understand what caffeine is to begin with. Caffeine is a plant's natural pesticide. So plants produce caffeine to fight off other bugs. So the decaffeination process actually strips its natural protection so that it can fight off insects, which means we got to use more pesticides for the coffee. Also, there were some horrible studies on how much insects were allowed in processed coffee, especially the coffees that are instant, okay, or your ground up coffees. And then there's also several studies. This is a big one, is the amount of acrylamide that's found in coffee based on how it's roasted. So the green coffee itself doesn't have the acrylamide. It's once it's introduced to heat. So the first two levels of roasting that we're familiar with, which is going to be your light roast and your medium roast, both of those are going to have the highest amounts of acrylamide. Acrylamide it's like, I don't know, it's like plastic in the body. It's a horrible toxin that you don't want. It's just as messy as glyphosate. And it's also found in other foods, specifically starchy plants that are cooked at high temperatures, such as potato chips and French fries and, things like that. Those are the foods that are going to have high amounts of acrylamide in it, okay? So what you're going to find is when you're consuming coffee, if you're going to drink coffee, one, keep in mind that coffee is addictive. Okay. I'm very familiar with the addiction of coffee. Coffee also can block dopamine because it does stimulate that dopamine receptor. So we can end up with dopamine resistance. It also blocks adenosine, okay, which is a neurotransmitter that's supposed to tell us when it's time to go to sleep. Okay. If you are going to consume coffee, I strongly recommend that you consume a dark roast, okay, whole bean, and never use decaffeinated. Okay. Also stay away from any of the larger popular companies, because that's not coffee. That rabbit hole, I don't even think I can say some of the stuff that I found with what you find in the sky and deer and bucks, if you know what I'm saying. That the combinations that I've seen in some of that, they can't pay me to ever go back there again. There's some very interesting toxins, the way they put them together. It's almost like it's strategized for a perfect storm inside the body. So again, if you're going to drink coffee, you're going to want to make sure that it's a dark roast, whole bean, grind your beans yourself. Okay. You're going to get less oxidation that way. And then that'll also help you to avoid the high exposure to the acrylamide, okay, from that coffee bean. Other than that, I'd say, I don't want to go too far into it, but that's probably the best I can give you guys.
All right. Through the screen, and that was who asked the question. So just watching her reactions as you pull her coffee away from her life. Okay, so next question that was connected to that in a way. A lot of people are drinking the Rise mushroom coffee. Do you have any thoughts on that at all?
I believe that one does have small amounts of coffee, or is it cacao?
Whoever asked the question about the Rise, or for those of you who are drinking that, you can answer that. I don't know. I don't drink that. So we'll come back to that once it's cacao.
Oh, it's cacao. Yeah, that should be fine. I don't see any issues with using the cacao bean. That should be fine. There's a lot of different mushroom coffees. I actually have one that I sell to my clients too. I mix the mushrooms, but I don't use coffee. I use matcha tea instead. I call it mighty matcha mushroom or mighty mushroom matcha. I can't remember what I call it, but whatever I slapped on the sticker. And basically it helps to synergize the caffeine because, you know, when it comes to caffeine will increase your cortisol and then you crash, right? So with matcha tea, green teas also have nominal amounts of caffeine, but they also have a compound called L-theanine. L-theanine slows down the crash, so you don't have that complete plummet. So it's almost like having a parachute. So you kind of just coast back down to normal, and your cortisol can be more easily regulated. And then, of course, synergizing caffeine with anything, any herb, just makes it more effective. That's why the Rise is such a popular item. I probably made Rise like 4 or 5 years ago and just said, oh, I'm sitting on my shelf. But I'm not familiar with what mushrooms they're using. I'm going to assume that they're using the basics, which is going to be like your turkey tail, your lion's mane. They're probably going to have some chaga in there. They should have some reishi, maybe maitake. Those are usually the basics that most of them will have. And those are all excellent mushrooms. If there's any mushrooms I would suggest a person to use, those definitely fall in line with it, especially the lion's mane. The lion's mane is like absolutely amazing. That's one of my personal favorites now. And reishi as well. Reishi is really good to help relax the nervous system, because a relaxed nervous system means an optimal immune system.
Okay, great. So we're going to try to do these a bit quicker. So can someone eat too many microgreens?
Too many microgreens? I don't think so. I load up my plate with microgreens as much as possible. It's like a base salad, and I'm taking a handful and a half, maybe 2, and I'm just dumping them. Okay. Microgreens are micronutrients. You know, it's almost like trying to take too much vitamins, but your body will always take what it needs and get rid of the rest. You know, so I let the body decide what it needs and what it doesn't.
Where do you recommend people buy herbs?
Mountain Rose they're expensive, but they do have pretty decent product. Most of it is organic. It is getting shipped from Canada. But if you're looking for something more local, you can always do like Bulk Apothecary. You can also order from, I think Bulk Apothecary would probably be, between Bulk Apothecary and Mountain Rose, those would be the 2 options. And of course, there's always Etsy. You'd be surprised. There are a lot of herbalists on Etsy they're just small businesses, and they got a backyard and they're growing plants. You know, if they're growing plants, you see good images, buy them. I think that, you know, that's a good bet, because those plants are getting a lot more love than, you know, the larger industries is giving the love to those plants. And last but not least, you know, check and see what's in your local area. Don't be afraid to go outside and see a plant, take a picture of it, put PlantNet on your phone and identify it. If it's something that you're willing to learn more about, it's growing next to you for a reason. This is something that has probably been following you around for decades. One of my favorites that followed me around as long as I was a kid was goldenrod. And what goldenrod is used to fight off candida and yeast, which is something that I suffered from. So it's always been following me around and telling me, hey, you need to take me, until one day I went out into the woods and I realized what it was. And I said, I'm going to learn you. And now it's in a lot of my formulas.
What is the best way to detox if you've been piling on the dairy, meat, and sugar? If you've been piling it on.
Ease into it slowly. And definitely do a detox program. You're going to want to, I would strongly suggest doing a detox program. I have one coming up at the end of the year. I'm sorry, beginning of next year. And you want to have that accountability where you're connecting with other people that are doing the work right along with you. And you want to also make sure that the program is easing you into it. So the way our system works is we kind of ease the person into getting ready for fasting to make sure that you have all of the base nutrition that's needed. Because if you're doing lots of animal protein and lots of dairy, then there's lots of inflammation. Okay, so we want to make sure that we kind of not shock and shift the body too quickly. We kind of have to ease you into it very slowly, which means you're going to have alternating days where you're going to be having cooked foods. There may be some meat substitutes for you as well. And then there's going to be some compounds that are going to help to make sure that your body can manage the shift.
Okay. What herbs do you suggest for menopause and hot flashes?
I think I just had that question recently. So that could be a little tricky, but I'm gonna give it the shortest, best shot that I can. Menopause and hot flashes. If you're saying menopause, then usually that means the person's a little bit older, right? And that there's going to be some issues with the adrenal system. So what often happens is we think of hot flashes as an estrogen thing, and it's always going to have something to do with the womb. But we got to remember during this time, the womb is turning off, the adrenal glands are turning all the way on, which means the adrenal glands are responsible for not just the production of cortisol, but they're also responsible for 30% of the production of all your hormones, which means if you've run a stressed life and then all of a sudden you're going to dump more work on the adrenal glands, your adrenal glands are going to look at you like you're crazy. And guess what? Now you have hot flashes because they're the ones that are going to be needed to produce those hormones. So what you want to do is you want to use different types of herbs that are going to not just support the hormones, but support your stress. Okay. Especially if you notice you got symptoms of like cravings for salty, crunchy foods. You want pretzels, you want potato chips, you want popcorn, you want something along those lines. You're going to want to increase your iodine. You're also going to want to take herbs such as, but not limited to, chasteberry, maybe a cohosh. And I say that as a maybe because that depends. You're going to want to take an adaptogen like ashwagandha, but you might need something stronger like rhodiola. Hawthorn berry, you're going to put all those together and you would take those regularly. A ginseng, like a red ginseng, also works really good in helping to maintain hot flashes. But again, it's really going to be contingent upon how your adrenal glands are working because they're the ones that are responsible for producing hormones after the change. So if you're stressed and you've always been stressed, and then you just come with a pile of work for your adrenal glands to do after they've already been working, and then you just dump it on the desk, they're going to be pissed. And that's usually what ends up happening.
What do you suggest for combating long-term hormonal acne?
I would definitely consider monitoring. First, you're going to want to monitor your cycle. You need to see where your 4 phases, your winter, spring, summer, fall is actually falling, which basically means monitoring your follicular phase, your ovulation phase, your luteal phase, and your menstrual cycle. Once you have all of those written down and you know exactly where each of them are falling, then you're going to want to start eating according to each of those phases because each of those 4 seasons has a different diet. Okay, so as men, we follow a circadian rhythm. We're up and down. That's it. We're pretty much easy. But it's a lot more complicated and intricate, I should say, when it comes to the woman's cycle. So, knowing where those phases are and then learning exactly how to eat, which is something that I go over with the client for each of those different phases, is going to be the first thing to support the hormones during those cyclical changes. And then later on, that's when I introduce different herbs to see exactly what's going to help to further support. Because what ends up happening, especially when it comes to like hormonal, when they say it's hormonal acne, PCOS, cysts, and all those things, you're going to find that one part of the phase isn't equally balanced to the other part. So you may have an extended luteal phase where that phase is, it should be about 12 to 13 days, but now you're looking at 16 to 20 days. And then your follicular phase, which should be your happier phase, this is your spring phase. It's not spring anymore. You're just kind of like tired. So it might only be about 4 or 5 days, which leaves you with an even shorter ovulation period. And then what ends up happening is after the ovulation, hormones start to decline. And there's this steady drop. The only thing is instead of you dropping for 10 days, it's like a drop for 15 to 20 days, and you end up dropping way too far. So I would start there and then move into figuring out which herbs can further support, because what ends up happening is people will just take herbs and say this will help this hormone, but every hormone isn't supposed to be high all the time. Estrogen is supposed to be high during a certain period. So you may take herbs that will increase estrogen, but then you need to take herbs that's going to increase and moderate progesterone too. And which one do you take during what week? So it's important to know where your infradian rhythm is falling.
How often should you detox your body?
Seasonally, at least 2 to 3 times a year. Some people like to take off in the summer, or they may inadvertently detox. Sometimes you just kind of do it because that's what's readily available. Fruits and vegetables are there, so you're going to eat more fruits and vegetables because that's what's in season. But at least 2 to 3 times a year. When the seasons shift, your body should be shifting into a different gear, and you need to hit the reset button.
What are some of the best herbs for low iron?
Herbs that kill parasites. Parasites, and I say this because parasites scavenge metal, but in the process of scavenging metal, they will also scavenge the metal out of your blood cell because that's iron, right? So eventually they'll look at the metal and they'll eat the metal, and then they're going to look at your blood and it goes, oh, well, that looks just as tasty. Let's go with that. And then they start eating the iron. So then you go to your doctor, you take an iron pill, and then you turn around, and what ends up happening? You're still in the same cycle. Now the iron is just simply feeding the parasite. So you definitely want to do a parasite cleanse. But aside from that, if you're going to use herbal support for your iron, sarsaparilla is one of my favorites, or also known as coco meca. That would be one that I would definitely suggest for people to use to help support not just the iron, but to support the blood's oxygen carrying capacity and its strength and integrity, because that's really what you want to do.
The person says, as someone who has hypertension or had hypertension challenges, what advice would you give for people suffering from that condition?
I would definitely give fasting a shot. I've had several clients who, were hypertensive, and after doing 1 to 2 fasting, where they're doing extended fasts, anywhere between 3 to 9 days of no chewing, what ends up happening is the body has an opportunity to start doing what's called autophagy, which is the ability to recycle damaged tissue, recycle proteins in the body. I'm sorry, my phone's is just exploding here. Recycle proteins inside the body. And a lot of what happens is that we start losing and having damage to like endothelial cells, endothelial tissue in the body, and we want to give it an opportunity to repair itself. But you can't cook with your oven and clean the oven at the same time. So if you want to give it a good opportunity to recycle, you want to just simply stop eating, stop taking in protein, stop taking in carbohydrates. You can still take in trace elements and minerals because that's going to provide the electricity the body needs to sustain itself. And as long as you're doing that, you'll be able to notice that you can go. And I've had clients do 10, 15 days. I got 2 people doing 30 days right now, where they haven't eaten anything in over 30 days. But you just want to make sure that you are maintaining your trace elements and minerals in order to sustain that.
I'm sorry. If someone is taking wheatgrass and sea moss gel, do they still need to take supplements?
Wheatgrass and sea moss gel, yes. So when I say supplements, I would analyze exactly where your supplemental deficiencies would lie. Sea moss gel, if it's just one sea moss, definitely not, especially if it's just Carandus crispus, that's going to be your golden moss. You're actually going to want a blend of green, red, as well as the golden moss. Or if you can happen to get your hands on the good stuff, which is that deep dark purple moss, then let me know so I can get some too. And then if you're doing the wheatgrass, I would still take additional supplements such as, but not limited to, I'd probably still do moringa and or nutritional yeast, because that's going to help process some of those bees. And then anything else that would come up in like a nutritional deficiency form. So there's like forms that you can fill out that would help to identify any symptoms that you may notice that you have that are interconnected with a specific deficiency. Like I was mentioning, how if you crave salty, crunchy foods, that may be something. If you're craving, or you have if you find yourself clenching your teeth at night, or drooling when you sleep, or you wake up in the middle of the night between hours of 2 and 4, all of those things are interconnected with certain deficiencies in the body.
Is CMOS and carrageenan the same thing?
The carrageenan is related to the red moss, but they're supposed to be a good version and a bad version. Basically, they degrade one and then they use it as a thickening agent, and that's what makes it increases its omega-6 inflammatory response in the body. So technically they are, but technically it's not. So if you're using it in the natural way, like you're making it at home, you're not putting it through a degrading process. That's the omega-6 the omega-6 inflammatory response that they're doing. Basically, they're denaturing it. They're not just cooking it.
You mentioned that if someone is shipping CMOS, it should explode. What did you mean by that?
So sometimes CMOS, if it's a gel, it should be it may be under pressure inside that jar. And if it's to be shipped over a long distance and it's in a gel form pre-made in a jar, even if it's packed in like ice, the jar should be still filled to capacity, meaning it should be kind of like filled all the way up to the top where there's no oxygen, because if there's any oxygen, then there's going to be oxidation and that's going to cause it to denature. So it should be filled to capacity, which means it's already to the maximum of its expansion. If it's shaken, stirred, temperature changes, travels in with any type of air pressure, 9 times out of 10, it should explode. So I know when I first started trying to ship CMOS, my CMOSs were exploding. My clients would send me a picture and I was like, and I didn't understand what was going on. But that was because I was trying to avoid the oxidation process. Now, if they leave some space, it may or may not explode. Chances are it won't, but that's not good for the nutritional value, because now what oxidation actually removes some of the nutritional value. So it's based on how long it takes to get to you.
How many milligrams of B1 do you recommend?
Minimum of 100 milligrams for every cup of coffee you drink, and that means 6 ounces of coffee. So if you're having a latte, venti, grande, supersized mug, then that could be 300 milligrams, 400 milligrams almost. If you eat starches, you should have at least 100 milligrams. So I generally, for myself, I take anywhere between 1 to 200 milligrams a day, even if I don't have coffee, even if I don't have starches.
What proportion should we take of the moringa powder?
Anywhere between a quarter teaspoon up to a teaspoon. I think a teaspoon is a little heavy, so I would do about half a teaspoon if you're very active.
Can you list and spell the other name that you called vitamin E, or the vitamin E complex?
Tocopherol and tocotrienols. Let me try and spell it here. Tocotrienols. Yes, that looks like it's correct. Yeah, that's tocotrienols. That's the other complex of the vitamin E that you're looking for. The tocopherol is the common form. That's the one you'll find everywhere. You're going to go in the vitamin shop. They're going to have a million of those on the shelf. But you're going to want the one that has the tocotrienols and the tocopherols. And they're going to go, oh, this one. And it's going to be like $40.
Can you recommend fish that can be eaten in the US?
Well, most of the ocean fish, and fish gets tricky too, but it's not so much tricky. I mean, most people are always going to be concerned with the metals that are involved in fish. I actually find it ironic that we're more concerned with the metals in fish than the metals of all the other things that we're exposed to, because they're usually much more higher in their amount, even when it comes to dealing with like pregnancy and things like that. But some of the best fish when wild caught are going to be things like your trouts, if it's wild caught, because I know we do use a lot of farm raised trout, but if you can happen to get your hands on some wild caught, that would be fantastic. That one actually has a really good fat in it. That's like an omega-3 fat. Very good for type O's and type A's. Yeah, type O's and type A's actually do very well with that fish. That's probably it. All the rest of them are like potluck for the most part. Trout is like the go-to. The other fish are usually more like trophy fish, but if there was a fish that you're going to consume, that would be it. And then most of the ones that you're going to find in the ocean as well. So your bass, your sea bass, not your lake bass, but your sea bass, your flounders and things like that are also going to be good sources. They're going to be nice and fatty, and they're going to give the body the fats that it needs. So when you consume a fish like that, that has all of its natural fats, your body is going to feel satisfied. You're not going to want to starch. All you're going to want is a side of vegetables, and then you're full and you're well fed.
And two related questions. What are your thoughts on organic soy milk? And is there a brand of store-bought almond milk that you recommend?
Store-bought almond milk. I think the Khalifa has a good one now. And then there's another brand called Malk, M-A-L-K. They have their ingredient lists are pretty solid. It has like 3 ingredients. It's like the nuts and water and maybe sugar or whatever, or something simple that they just add to it. But the ingredients are very simple. It has 3 ingredients. It's not like the ones where you're reading and 3 of the words in there, you don't know what they are. And you're like, what's this? And you know, now you're playing the guessing game. Soy milk, I'm not a big fan of it, but I have had times where I'll use it for clients, especially if I'm trying to stimulate natural estrogen in a person. But for the most part, I try to stay away from soy, because soy in this country is in the same category with wheat and gluten. So we've adulterated soy to the point where it's almost useless now. Now, if you happen to get it imported, you know, if it comes from Japan or something, and even that's kind of sketchy because Japan takes a lot of stuff from us now. But if you happen to get it imported, then maybe I would roll dice with it. But for the most part, I would stay away from soy.
Is L-methionine the same as just regular methionine?
Yeah, you can use either one.
How would you know that sea moss has gone bad?
You won't notice if it lost any of its nutrition. But you will, when it's gone bad, it smells. You will always know it's gone bad. It definitely has a funny smell to it. And you'll also oftentimes will see mold growing on it as well. Sometimes it'll be under pressure when you go to open it.
Okay. Can you speak about apple peel powder? Is the person has heard that it's anti-inflammatory and can ease pain. Is that true?
Absolutely. Apple pectin is phenomenal. As a matter of fact, anything that has pectin in it is going to be very healing on the inside as well as the outside of the body. That's why there's always been a rich history of like using things like lemon peels and different types of plant or fruit skins to heal the skin of the human body. But it also does the same thing in the colon. So it actually helps to suck and siphon out toxins from the walls of the colon. So I have a compound called the intestinal scrub. And during detoxes, we take this particular compound, which oftentimes has apple pectin in it. And that's one of the reasons why in the questionnaire on the website, I have to ask, do you have any allergies? Because I want to make sure that everything fits, because I like to use apple pectin in the scrub. When you combine apple pectin with bentonite and psyllium, you end up making this gelatinous goo inside the colon that's also ionized with electricity that actually will pull free radicals out of the colon. So over the process of you detoxing, you end up basically pooping out larger poops. So your poops may go from one size to these ginormous logs. And you're like, whoa, now my poop looks like a 5-year-old's, which is essentially what they should look like when we think about it, because a 5-year-old's poop will break the toilet, and our poops is sometimes, smaller and skinnier or flat, or comes out in pieces. And those are indications that we have inflammation in the colon, and the colon is the walls are dual layer lined organ system that has inflammation and trash in the intercostal spaces. So we need something to kind of function like a sponge to kind of pull it out. That's what pectin basically does. Pectin kind of does that. And pectin's also well known for pulling out glyphosate out of the system too.
Okay. What do you wash your fruits and vegetables with?
Water. There are some compounds. I never really use them. And to be honest, a lot of my fruits and vegetables I either get from a farm and they're usually dusty and dirty, or I go out and I harvest them myself.
What can we take to prevent infections such as COVID, RSV, and the flu?
So for a short while, I had a compound that basically had the goldenrod that I had mentioned. But I think I ran out of it. It was like for a very short while because it was in season and it's in here and it's gone the next day. I would say the best thing right now is going to be running something like a pine needle and maybe like a stinging nettle combination. That might get you some protection. There's another herb, if you can get your hands on it, it's in the Caribbean called cerasee. I use cerasee, pine needle, nettle, another compound called usnea, and osha root, and I blend all those together and I make something called the Formula 1 antiviral that basically neutralizes viruses. What it does is it goes in and it removes viruses' ability to produce its own ATP so that that particular virus can't make its own energy. It doesn't kill it, but it stops making energy, which means if it can't make energy, it can't activate a cloaking mechanism, because a lot of viruses essentially are cloaking themselves so that white blood cells run right past them and can't be seen. So you have to neutralize the energy producing qualities of it. So I'll use different formats like that. But if you're just trying to maintain, overall health and protection, vitamin C obviously is going to be a big one because we don't make our own vitamin C in the human body. Pine needles I like, and stinging nettles I also like, as far as preventative. I might even throw in turkey tail. Okay, is something that you may want to consider adding in, because that's a powerful what we call an immunomodulator, and it's going to help make sure that your immune system doesn't over respond, because everyone's immune system over responds and it just pretty much hammers the body, and then when you're exposed to infection you don't have a controlled response. Turkey tail is an immunomodulator. It'll make sure that you use a sniper rifle to kill the bacteria or virus that you're coming into contact with. Basically, that's what it's like, instead of you using a shotgun to kill a fly.
Okay. So these two questions are related. How do you determine what your blood type is? And then next question, someone asked, I'm type A blood type. Any specific info regarding what I consume? Person doesn't eat meat, eggs, or dairy. Where can they find more of the blood type information?
Look up Dr. Diadamo, and he's the one that did all of the information on the blood type diet. I like to use it as like baseline for clients. Currently, they don't really want knowing your blood type unless you're either having a baby or you're giving blood. If you try to go to your physician now and ask them for information on your blood type, they're going to charge you out of pocket, because what they were finding is that people were learning their blood types and were eating according to their blood type. And 80% of them were noticing significant improvements in their diet, because now they know this food's okay, this food is not. Even as far as vegetables, certain vegetables or beans may be too difficult for you to break down, and then the next vegetable may be okay. So like for me, avocados are very difficult for my blood type to break down. Type O's and avocados don't mix very well, because avocado is such an alkalizing plant. It's going to shut down my stomach acids and makes it more difficult for me to produce the pepsin that's necessary to break down the protein for future meals. So if I have an avocado on Monday, I better not ever think about having a piece of animal protein until the following week, because if I have animal protein on Thursday, I'm going to have a problem digesting it.
Are there any herbs that you recommend for multiple sclerosis?
That's a tough one. There is one herb. I'm skeptical to mention it because I don't want you to just run out and grab it. Because everyone's not going to make it right either. And it's tricky to work with. I would say, no, I'm going to say no. I don't want to mention it because sometimes people don't make that herb right. There's a herb that is used, but it may cover up the symptoms, and improve and kind of lead you into a false sense of security if it's not done right. And the other issue is that it has to be harvested at a very particular time of the year. And it either has to be, and you have to get the root. And what a lot of herbalists and practitioners do is they'll just sell, especially if it's like a large company, like you order from Amazon or something like, they'll just sell you whatever. They don't care when they harvest it. They'll just sell it to you, and then you'll take it, and then, it may work. And then all of a sudden you start building up a resistance to it working for you from having what's called diminishing returns. So then when you run into someone who actually makes it the right way and you go to take it, it doesn't work. It's kind of like, one-hit wonder. You want to make sure when you get it and you use it, you're using it correctly. I will mention it because I'm already talking about it. It's called Teasel. Okay. But it does have, if you're interested, you can reach out to me in the background. I can kind of either point you in the right direction, or if I have some lingering around, but it's something you don't want to just order from anyone. You want to make sure that the person is making and harvesting that teasel ethically and appropriately, and then processing it right. And then they have to give you the right instructions on how to use it. You want to make sure you're using a few drops, and then you're slowly and gradually building up your tolerance to it.
What are your thoughts on tofu and other, I guess, vegan alternatives like tempeh and things like that?
Not too keen on it. There's some other options though. There's like pumfu, and they got mushroom grinds, and you can make a lot of stuff out of walnuts. So I think there's a lot of other better options that won't jack up your estrogen levels, because tofu and all of those, you're still dealing with soy base. And a lot of people are coming up with allergies to soy, especially in the United States. So I try to steer clear of it. It's not something that's a staple in my diet.
Are there any mushrooms that you can eat raw?
I would say no. I wouldn't consume any mushrooms raw, and that's for safety purposes. All mushrooms have good and bad qualities to them. Most of the bad qualities are neutralized when they're under heat. So that's generally the best way to neutralize a lot of the compounds. So, and almost, now that I think about it, most mushrooms can be problematic. Even some of the ones that are things like chicken of the woods or maitakes, you still want to apply heat to those. Now, if some people may try them raw and build up a tolerance to it where they can consume them more regularly, raw on a more regular basis. I don't. I think that, all the mushrooms, especially the meaty ones, those are the ones that you want to make sure you apply heat and cook.
Are there any herbs that someone can take to reduce cholesterol?
Reduce cholesterol. Reduce cholesterol is tricky. I would say that if there were herbs that would help to reduce cholesterol, I would use herbs that would help support how the gut and the gallbladder are functioning in the body, because 9 times out of 10, most cholesterol issues is a fat and lipid issue, which means that there's an issue with the bile ducts, and there's an issue with how the emulsification of fats is occurring inside the small intestines. So I would want to check that first. And if that is the case, then anything that's going to help with the emulsification of fats in the body is going to help with cholesterol, because cholesterol is intimately connected to how your body is processing and managing lipids and fats. Obviously, if you're consuming, omega-6 fats all the time, that's obviously going to be a problem. But if that's not the case, I wouldn't go directly after the cholesterol. I would start by introducing bitters first and using things to enhance the small intestinal lining, because your bile gets secreted from your gallbladder. Your gallbladder and your bile is responsible to emulsify and break down fats and lipids. If it's running short, or you don't have enough, or it's not strong enough, or you don't have a gallbladder, your cholesterol is going to be high. That's the math of it.
Okay. Are there any specific brands for bitters and B complex that you recommend?
B complexes, the natural well, I guess vitamin wise, There's one brand that I think it's on my website. It's called Kyani. They have a really good B complex, but it's a liquid multivitamin. I give that to my kids. I never get any because they take it all, but it tastes good.
Can you spell that?
Yep, I'll spell it for you. I'll put it right in the chat. It's called Kyani. It's a liquid multivitamin. And what they did was they put in nitric oxide rich herbs. So they put in things like ashwagandha and noni fruit and anything to kind of enhance the NO2 levels of the body. Oh, and the other one was Alaskan blueberry. And what that does is it synergizes with the herb, with the base nutrients like the B complexes and E's and all the other vitamins and minerals, so that they have a better chance getting through the body. A lot of times we'll take things, and if you have inflammation and constriction in a certain area of the body, that's like trying to send something down a one-way street with a garbage truck blocking it. You will not get the nutrition to that zone that you're trying to get it to until the inflammation goes down. Synergizing in that way gets the nitric oxide to kind of open everything up, gives your body a blast of oxygen, allows things to expand, then it sends the vitamins in. That's one that I would suggest if I was going to take something that wasn't, natural, such as, but not limited to, moringa powder or nutritional yeast.
And can someone consume apple peel powder if they have kidney disease?
I don't see why not. Apple peel it's kind of in the same category with apple peel. I don't know why I was thinking orange. Apple peel, I don't see any problems with that. Apple peel powder is basically food. Just make sure that you are taking in enough. I don't want to say water. I want to say hydration. Okay. Make sure you're hydrated, because there's a difference between drinking water and being hydrated. You want to make sure you're drinking the trace element and mineral rich forms of water. So if you're going to have regular water, you might put some mint leaves and some sliced strawberries in there, maybe even a twinge of syrup or honey or something along those lines, maybe a slice of lemon. Now it has trace elements and minerals in there that your body can utilize, because plain water is going to maybe too alkalizing, and then your body's going to want to flush that out. Okay. And that we don't want to put any unneeded pressure on the kidneys. But when you're taking in powders like that, those powders do require, they're going to absorb more water. So you still need to add in some hydration to that powder.
Okay. Are there any herbs that you recommend for pain management or getting rid of numbness?
Pain and numbness. That sounds like a sugar issue. I'm going to say, if you're trying to buy yourself time while you're changing your diet, I would suggest using herbs like thyme, rosemary, sage, probably a combination of all three might prove to be helpful. May even want to consider sliding in a little ginger, or actually a lot of ginger, with cayenne pepper. Okay. The cayenne pepper is going to increase the piperines, which is going to synergize with the ginger, and it's going to make it even more anti-inflammatory. It's going to increase blood flow and microcirculation. When there's numbness and there's pain, that means the blood vessels and endothelial cells are starving for oxygen and nutrients. You need to open that up so that they can get their exchange. I would also recommend, sometimes it's cold now, but if you can find like either an EM pulse table, or if you can get some actual grounding, that's going to also offer a lot of anti-inflammatory into the system as well.
Is there a brand of moringa powder that you recommend?
Not really. I usually go to the Asian market and I pick mine up.
Okay.
Moringa is pretty common.
Last question. I'm not sure if you kind of said this already, but what are your thoughts on tempeh?
That's also in that soy category, so it's not really, I'm not a big fan of the soys. Like I said, if it's imported, maybe, but not in the United States. I'm not a big fan. I think between soy, gluten, and chicken, they I got a personal vendetta against them because what they did to my testosterone. So, you know, it may be good, maybe it's imported, maybe it's okay, but I just avoid them at all costs. And I even have in my detoxes, like the first thing is like no gluten, no soy, don't even look at it. So because I'm not having it, I won't let anybody else have it. Now afterwards, you can have some if you choose to, but those are at the top of my list. No animal protein, no milk, no cheese, no dairy, no gluten, no soy, no white bread, white pasta, nothing processed. All that stuff has to go.
And then how do you feel about SON 7 and 9 detox, SONNE?
I'm not familiar with it. I would have to look that up.
Okay, great. I think that is everything. All right, Coach Jay. So we are ending the year. This is our year in review, wrap it up presentation. So what are 3 tips that you have for everyone who stayed on? We had 100, we're left with 81, so that's pretty good. At 9:30 on a Monday night, I think that's pretty good. So what are some tips that you have for them ending this year and starting the new year?
If you just got finished detoxing, continue the process and try to remove something out of your system, such as deodorant. Try and stop using deodorant if you can. If you just got finished fasting, going raw foods, maybe take the step to trying to get rid of having to use it. Deodorant is very toxic. It introduces a lot of the metals into the body that we're always trying to fight against when it comes to parasites. So if you can make your own deodorant, which, you know, you can do that offline. There's a lot of recipes on YouTube. You just need an alcohol, you just need an essential oil and some water, distilled water. You mix it up together, you spray it under your arms. You can actually detox your lymphatic system under your arms and use a deodorizer at the same time.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Coach Jalen. And just some final reminders, everyone. So as I mentioned, this Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern time, we have a HeartSmarts information session. So I will send the flyer and information for that out tomorrow. And then next Monday will be our last of these presentations for 2023. And we will have Doug Evans here. So if you all can invite a friend, share it in whatever communities that you're in. Same thing with the HeartSmarts info session flyer. If you know of any organizations or groups that can benefit from the program, or even individuals, you can share it with them as well. And so I think that's it. And we'll say it again, the Thanksgiving is over. And so we hope that you all have been reinvigorated and reset to continue with your wellness goals. And if you have just been joining these sessions, but you are not part of HeartSmarts, but you'd like to join HeartSmarts, please send me an email. We'd love to have you. We are getting started January 1st. So we have some exciting programs for next year, and I'm hoping that Coach Jay will join us in January again to get us kicked off for the year. So I'm going to ask you all to come off mute and share your gratitude with Coach Jay. And thank you so much, Coach Jay, as always, for your generosity and all the information that you shared with us tonight. So you all can come off mute.
Thank you so much.
you.
Thank you, Coach Jay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Nice.
All right. Thank you,
Good
Dr.
night. Good
Tettey.
night, everybody.
God
Thank you,
bless.
Dr. Tess.
Thank you. Be well. Be blessed.